lovely people of the internet, I am back and I am doing another book versus film Harry Potter comparison, and as I've done the first one already, I am onto the second book, which is The Chamber of Secrets, and I'm not gonna lie, I was surprised. Let's get started. So my overall thoughts is I actually think there were more similarities between the second book and the second film than there are between the first book and film, which I thought was probably the more similar because it was the shortest book, so it's probably the easiest to adapt, and I think there's so many iconic lines, but actually there was tons of similarities with the second one. It didn't help to start with that I managed to watch the extended cut version of the film, so there was a couple of scenes where I was like, I am pretty sure that's not in the original film, and I'm going with comparing the original because that's the version that most people have seen of the film, so that makes the most sense. But those scenes aside, there are actually tons of similarities, and they chop and change less to make it work for film world, and they keep in so many lines from the second one. So actually, yeah, I think it's probably a very accurate adaptation, which is interesting. A couple of mentions before I get into my favourite similarities and my favourite differences that I think are worth mentioning, that I'm kind of neutral on, which is not including the denaming the garden at the Burrow. I think that could have been funny to see on in the film, but I kind of don't mind that it wasn't included, and I guess it was just some extra CGI, so they kind of didn't include that, which is fair enough. And also not including the Death Day party, which again, probably not included for the same reason, and also that one I'm more neutral about because it's probably my least favourite part of the book, so I kind of don't mind that they removed that part, and I think they deal in the film really well with how they just work the plot around that, because it's after that, that's why they weren't at the Halloween feast, which is then when they come across the first time the chamber is opened, and I think it works quite well that they just slot in that Harry's in detention at that stage instead, and I think for film that works. But yeah, so those are just some of my observations. Oh, and then the fact that it has a more heartfelt ending in the film, a bit like how they changed the first one. There's still a little bit of the humour, but they go more for the heartfelt ending, so it's when Hagrid comes back and all of the students hug him and they're really happy to have him back, and it wouldn't be Hogwarts without Hagrid. Whereas the book actually ends with a funny line about Harry being joking about the Dursleys not being proud of him because there'd been like so many chances to have died and I couldn't manage it. But yeah, we lose a lot of Harry sass lines, but I think I like the heartfelt endings that they make more of an emphasis on in the films. I think they are nice. So now I will do my top similarities between the books and the films. My favourite similarity is how well done Dobby is. Dobby is one of my favourite characters in the franchise. You see a lot more of him in the books, which I think you do miss a little bit in the films, and I think that's why it's actually, if you read the books, I think it's easier to get more upset about Dobby's death because you have seen significantly more of him in the books. But yeah, Dobby in this film is just spot on. I think visually he matches the description incredibly well. They keep in some of my favourite lines with Dobby when they first meet and Harry's like, sit down, and Dobby then erupts into like screaming, crying because he's never been asked to sit down before. I'm so glad they kept in things like that. All of the times he says bad Dobby and he has to punish himself. They kept in when he visits Harry in the hospital that he's ironed his fingers as punishment. I'm glad they kept that in. The line, Dobby is used to death threats, he gets them 5 times a day at home. You're just like, oh Dobby, bless you, but it's funny at the same time. And then everything about the freeing Dobby scene I think is just perfect. Although I did notice a difference that Harry actually, the sock is obvious, like he puts the sock on top of the diary, gives it to Malfoy. Malfoy then like just discards the sock and Dobby catches it rather than it being in the diary, which I think was a bit cleverer, I think, in the film. I actually think I prefer that, so that's yeah, that was a good one. But yeah, and then and then another difference that I picked up with Dobby was a sass line from Harry, which is when Dobby's like, Dobby was only trying to wasn't trying to kill Harry was in like trying to maim him, and Harry's like, oh, was that all? I wish some more of the Harry sass lines had made it into the films. But yeah, Dobby as a whole is probably one of my favourite similarities between the two. I'm very glad they kept in Harry's infamous line of "I'll be in my bedroom making no noise at all" line. I think that one is perfect. I think it's memed so much. Yeah, so I'm glad they kept that one in. Everything about the car rescue scene, and then the burrow I think is perfect. Reading the description of the burrow again in the book and then specifically comparing it, I think they brought the burrow to life so well. I think the clock is great. Showing the examples of like Molly doing the chores with magic, I think, yeah, it's great. And then that leads me on nicely to the fact that I think they got Molly and Arthur Weasley just spot on in the films. Like, they match the book so well, and I'm glad they got some of their key lines, including "Bed's empty, no note, car gone, you could have died." That one, that's a great Molly Weasley one. The entire Howler, although I did notice that in the films they add on the bit about, "Oh, and Ginny dear, we're so proud of you getting into Gryffindor," and I think that's perfect. I actually think that's a nice little juxtaposition, going from screaming so angry to then down to like the sickly sweet mum kind of voice. I think, but the Howler and Molly Weasley in that is great. And then Arthur Weasley, that when he finds out that they've stolen the car, and his reaction is to be like, "Oh, how did it go?" rather than, "Oh, that's really bad." And I love the dynamic between the two. I think they get that so spot on in the films. It's great. Another character, it's a love to hate character, but it's done so well, is Kenneth Branagh as Lockhart. It's perfect. Apart from the fact, I think probably Lockhart's meant to be younger, but other than that, just played perfectly. They keep in some of the funniest lines. It's quite funny reading the books back and realising how often Lockhart actually drives Harry insane in the books, and we see some of the key ones in the film, but there's just so many more in the books, which yeah, is funny. But some of my favourite lines and scenes that they kept in with Lockhart are the scene in Flourish and Blots when he pulls Harry up for the photo opportunity and gives him his whole set of books. And I think, yeah, it's just the perfect introduction to Lockhart being that kind of smarmy celebrity, off the camera kind of persona, and I'm glad that they kept that in the films, because it's the perfect introduction in the books as well. I'm glad they kept the main classroom bits, so the fact that he starts with a quiz about himself and that his favourite colour is lilac, and that Hermione gets 100%, because I mean, Hermione would always get 100%, but the fact that she also fancies him is yeah, hilarious. And then the whole scene with the Cornish pixies, that they keep that in to a T, including Neville on the candelabra, Lockhart leaving Harry, Ron and Hermione to finish clearing up, and the line, "I must warn you not to scream, it might provoke them." Yeah, I'm glad they kept in that whole scene in its entirety, because it is a funny one. They pretty much keep in the dueling club scene. There's a bit that's taken out, but I kind of see why. It was a way of condensing it down, but they kept the main bits in, and and they keep in Lockhart's great lines about being like, "You'll have your potions master left at the end," and then Snape is the one to then blow Lockhart off his feet, and he's like, "Oh, obviously I meant for that to happen, not that I'm useless." But yes, I think that's great. I'm glad that they do keep in all of the professors volunteering Lockhart to go down into the chamber, because they're all so fed up of him. I think that's funny. Oh, and then I'm glad they keep in the line when he's lost his memories down in the chamber, and he's like, "Oh, this is an odd sort of place. Do you live here?" Yeah, I think that's great. I think it finally brings Lockhart down to, yeah, just pure humour level. And then another character casting I think that was perfect is Jason Isaacs as Lucius Malfoy. He plays it perfectly, and I think they keep the integrity of that character so well. Like, he is just that nasty, evil character that he should be. But yeah, and it's perfect. I think the car, the Ford Anglia car, I think is great. I did notice in the extended cut version that you see the car when it's gone like feral and wild in the forest, which you don't get in the original cut of the film. So that was quite funny, because I think that's quite amusing in the books, that it's basically gone wild. And then the Whomping Willow, I think that's great, and obviously you see more of that in the third one. But I like the Whomping Willow. I think they did that great. I loved seeing the mechanism again of that at the studio tour recently, so that was cool. I think they do the mandrakes really well. Oh god, there's so many similarities, I'm going to be here forever. Ron and the slug scene with his backfiring wand. You've got Filch and Mrs. Norris and being really upset when she's petrified and being like, my cat's been petrified, I need to see some punishment. They do keep in some good Filch lines sometimes, which is great. I think the bludger scene is pretty much spot on. I love the ineptitude of Lockhart at that point as well, and the fact that he removes all of the bones, and then they keep in Madame Pomfrey's like iconic line of being like, I can mend bones however quickly, and then yeah, it's a whole other thing to grow them all back. And yes, I think that's nice that Madame Pomfrey gets a little moment there. I love Fawkes. I love Myrtle. Oh, Myrtle is perfect. Yep, some of my favourite lines are, oh, wait till you see it's awful when Hermione has transformed into a cat rather than a person. When she's describing how she died, it's like, oh, it was dreadful, and it's oh so dramatic. I love it. I think it's perfect. Oh, and her line, it's done in different places in the book and the film, so it's either past tense or present tense, but it's like that if you die, you can share my toilet, Harry, because she's got a crush on him. I think that's great. I love the Crab and Goyle and the Polyjuice potion scene. I'm glad they kept that in, and like they keep a lot of it the same. And actually, when you think about it, we all get really excited about the scene where Hermione is has used Polyjuice potion to become Bellatrix, and how good the acting is in that scene. But I think we never give credit to the fact that the Crab and Goyle actors, they had to do it in the second film, and it's like the same thing. It's like them pretending to be, yeah, and it's great. Dumbledore's office I think is great. I love Fawkes. I think Fawkes is great. Tom Riddle and the diary. The Chamber of Secrets is pretty much spot on, apart from the fact that I think it's meant to be like the whole of Salazar Slytherin rather than his face, but I think otherwise it's got like the whole chamber has like the grandeur that's described in the books. Like everything, the basilisk is like, yeah, pretty spot on. And kept like a lot of the Tom Riddle lines from that scene as well that are like iconic, and it's like that I am like Tom Marvolo Riddle, it's like I am Lord Voldemort. This is what Dumbledore sends his defender, a songbird and an old hat. But yeah, so many similarities. So I think I better move on to my differences, because I think my list is shorter. So now the differences. Interesting. It's been a long one so far, I think, just on similarities. This is why I was so surprised. But yeah, so one difference I like is that in the films, the pudding that Dobby suspends actually falls on the wife of Mr. Dursley's boss, whereas it just falls in the book. So I think that's a little bit more dramatic, so that's good. Oh, there's no Arthur and Lucius fight in Flourish and Blots though in the films, which I think could have been amusing. I don't know how they would have filmed that, but I think it could have been amusing. But yeah, it's after Malfoy basically insults the Weasleys in Flourish and Blots. Him and Arthur actually end up getting into a fight, so I think that would have been quite a funny addition. Oh, a sass line from Harry that got cut is it's McGonagall when they get caught having flown the car and like in trouble, and Harry says, oh, you shouldn't take points from us because technically the term hadn't started at the time, and I think that's just a great Harry sass line. I noticed herbology, they have it with the Hufflepuffs in the books, whereas it's with the Slytherins in the films. So then they have to rework, there's like one scene in particular with Justin Finch-Fletchley, which they then had to rework. They got that into the dueling club scene instead in the film. But yeah, I guess it's because they like to just have the Slytherins and the Gryffindors in classes together, I guess. But yeah. Oh, and there's no pink fluffy earmuffs in the films, which I think is a shame. One way they give Hermione more knowledge than I think she probably should have is that, yeah, in the books, Ron explains what a mudblood is, whereas Hermione does in the films. And I think it makes more sense for Ron to explain it, because I don't know if Hermione would know what the term is. We've not heard it before, so you would assume as a Muggleborn that she wouldn't know what that slang term is. So yeah, and I think that's a shame. That's one of the time I don't like it when they take some of the Wizarding World knowledge lines that Ron has in the books and give them to Hermione, because I'm like, no, she wouldn't always know everything. Yes, she reads an awful lot, but I think there's some things that Ron would know better because he's big grown up in the Wizarding World. I've realised, yes, Harry doesn't actually know that Filch is a squib in the films. It's the extended cut one that I saw. I saw how they managed to get that bit in without the full scene that's in the books. So that it kind of makes sense why Filch goes so off the handle about Harry being the one who's petrified his cat because he knows he's a squib. And it's like, actually in the original cut of the films, Harry doesn't have a clue. So I think that kind of gets lost, and I think actually the scene that I've realised is like an extended scene. I think they should have kept that little tiny bit in, because I think it's a useful piece of knowledge. It kind of, overall, it doesn't detract too much, but I think it's useful to have. I prefer the entrance to Dumbledore's office is the big griffin statue in the films. I think that's great. In the books, it's actually like, it's like a gargoyle or something, like guarding, and then it's just a griffin knocker on the actual office. But I think that statue is just so much more dramatic, and yeah, great, I love it. Yes, I love the stages of the mandrakes as they're getting older. They mention quite a few more in the books, and the film does mention them having acne to, like, say, like their teenager stage. But in the books, it also says that they have a party in the greenhouse, which I think is quite funny. Oh yeah, in the books, Lockhart goes all out for Valentine's Day, and he hires these Cupid dwarves, and I think that could have just been amusing to see in the films, maybe a bit. Again, it's one of those ones I'm kind of neutral about because it doesn't really add anything, but yeah. And then my last main difference is that Harry doesn't pull the sword out of the sorting hat. It kind of just appears on the hat, and I think it would have been better if he'd pulled it. I don't know if it was easier special effects wise or something, but I think that would have been better, because then I think the line with Dumbledore, oh yeah, which is a similarity that I like, about like, if you weren't a true Gryffindor, you couldn't have pulled the sword out, and I think they changed that line a little bit, but yeah, it makes more sense because he did actually pull it out rather than it just appearing. Oh yes, which reminds me of a similarity that I missed, which was the forest scene in Aragog. I think that works really well, and we get some key lines from Aragog. And so that is my thoughts on a comparison between the second Harry Potter book and the second film, Chamber of Secrets. Yeah, it was a surprising one. I didn't expect to find that many similarities, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because we just know those iconic lines from the first book and film. And whilst there are lots from the second one as well, I think, yeah, you just forget some of them more. But yeah, so it's interesting. Ron is definitely a lot more scared of spiders as well in the second film than he is in the second book, which is interesting. But yeah, so no, let me know your thoughts. What do you think about the comparison between the second book and film? Have you got any thoughts for the third book and film, which I will be comparing in some point in the future? But yeah, drop me some comments down below, get a discussion started. I love to talk all things Harry Potter, so do. If you did enjoy this video, do hit that thumbs up button. If you haven't already, do hit subscribe so you get notified of when I do upload any new videos. I'll put some links to some other videos around here that you might be interested in because you watched this one, and I will see you in my next video, hopefully. See ya!